Hi everybody, welcome to Soul Parts and Healing in Norse Tradition. I'm Kari Tauring and I've been studying the Norse cosmology, mythology, metaphysical concepts. Some people call me a heathen theologian, and it's such a pleasure to try and untangle what our pre-Christian ancestors believed, how they viewed the world, how they viewed themselves, and then how that changed with conversion to Christianity. So the concept of many people in our Western culture talk about the body, mind, and spirit as a three-part thing. Of course, throughout Western culture, those three things have been maintained as separate entities, even separate from one another. Descartes, the famous philosopher, he says, "I think, therefore I am." So he decided that mind was the most important thing. And then in Christianity, we were taught that the soul is separate from the mind and the body, but that the body is the temple of the spirit. So that's why we have to take care of the body. Well, no word for soul like that existed in Old Norse until conversion. There wasn't a single word that meant the soul. So, what did they have, and how do we know what they had? So our first story of how humans were created in the first place comes from the first poem in the Poetic Edda, which is the old Icelandic poems that were handed down through oral tradition and then were written just after Christianization. And it's the Voluspa, the prophecy of the staff-carrying woman. And this is the poem where Odin comes to the staff carrier and asks her to remember things. And she remembers the beginning of the world, and she remembers the way of creation, and she remembers how the three brothers, Woden, Vili, and Ve, Odin and his two brothers, Wod, Vili, and Ve, whose names translate to spirit, will, and holiness. And so it says in verse 17 and 18, "To the coast then came, kind and mighty, from the gathered gods three Aesir, three great, kind, mighty gods, Woden, Vili, and Ve, or in this version, it's Odin, Hönir, and Lothir. And those are kennings or nicknames for the three brothers. So they come to the coast and they find, of little strength, Ask and Embla, which translates to ash tree and elm tree. And Snorri tells us that ash trees represent men or male persons in the in mythic language. So although Askeladdn, the ash lad stories, come because that is the prototype of human male. And Embla, elm tree, always represents female. So this ash tree and elm tree, unfated yet. That means they did not have a lineage of Urlag. They didn't have. They were a non-created creation waiting to happen, the beginning of their creation time. Since they possessed not soul, they had not being, nor bearing, nor blooming hue. And so in Hollander's Edda, he translates it to soul, the word to soul. But in Old Norse, it says Odin, who this name translates to the spirit, gave them ond, or breath, which is inspiration, the ability to breathe in and ignite our spirits. And Hunter gave this soul part called Oder, which means divine connection and the understanding of ourselves as part of divine nature and having free will. So this idea of will, coming into play. And Loder gave them Hammer, or holiness in our hue, gave us the skin, the astral body, the way of holding ourselves together. So those are the first 3 words that we have for the complexity of how we were made. We've got Ond, given by Odin, or spirit. And this is breath, but not just breathing, but the breath that sparks our life. So first breath and inspiration. And then we got Oder from Hunir. And this is also Vili. So this is, in the old Germanic, it's Vod, Vili, which is will. And Oder is divine consciousness. Divine consciousness, and this connects us to free will. We are more than just beings that are moving along on instinct only. We know we have choices, we have divine consciousness, we have free will. And that was the gift of Vili. And then Loder gave us Hammer. And Ve is holy enclosure. Hammer is like an astral body. It's so, and then ultimately we have a type of soul, because we were born of trees, that is called a Thera soul, and that was given to us by our tree ancestors. Our tree ancestors, Ask and Embla, is what also then that's what it's not just that we're created from trees, it's that we're related to trees. And in fact, we're related through our very breath and spirit as we produce it. When we breathe in, we are breathing in the oxygen that the trees give us. We are breathing in that piece. And when we breathe out, we are giving them what they need to live. That carbon that we breathe out, that would be poisonous to us, but is food for them. And so that is the Thera soul. This concept is also essential to our greater mythic piece, because it is a tree, a world tree, that holds the entire cosmos together. And so these soul parts are parts that we share with all of the cosmos. And so that is it's very interesting, because people think that the Old Norse were very, very independent and separate from others and stuff, but their entire view of themselves was as a tightly knit, interconnected body, mind, and many soul part kind of interconnection. So the breath that Odin gives us is more than just breath. It is that connective, the full circuit that we give to the rest of nature, and that nature returns to us. It is our spirit is enlivened through our breath. And then that divine consciousness is more than just, as is translated by Hollander, sense. It's more than just sense. It's about that understanding of our connectivity. And then blooming hue is more than just blooming hue. It's hamur is one of the most often repeated words of this sort of understanding of who we are in Norse tradition, and also in not just the ancient Norse pieces, but also through folk tradition, through trollkunning and folk magic knowledge. The idea of the hamur is still part of that. So that is sort of our soul skin. The Ferrisol is the one that is least talked about and the most mysterious, but also to me, the one that I feel the most when I am in nature, which being in nature is a spiritual, sacramental kind of action for Norse people. We go into nature for our sustenance, and it's our Ferrisol that we are really developing when we do that. So another very common word that we have for our soul parts is the word hug. So hug has the, if you look hug up in the Norwegian dictionary, you will find it says thought, spirit, heart. It isn't just one thing or another. It's a thought, spirit, heart connection. So hug, I'll write this down here so we have it on the board. Thought, spirit, heart. The heart is seen as the root of our thought. There are a couple of words that can really help you understand, I think, this a little bit more. In Norway, if somebody is depressed, they say that they are huglaus, that their thought, spirit, and heart are loose from each other. Huglaus. And when a person is hugleg, or if something is really huggers you, it means your thought, spirit, and heart are in alignment. Some people who have studied Old Norse mythology will say, now, is that the same as Odin's raven Hugin? Hugin. And I would say, yes, the spirit, Odin, has all of these parts as well. And so Hugin, and Munin is memory and spirit. And I believe that memory is also anchored in the heart. If our body is the world tree, the heart is like the very crotch of the tree, connected to the trunk and the roots, and just as things are branching out. So Hugin and Munin, those ravens of Odin, would perch on his shoulders, he would say. I can put this right here, is that good? So Hugin and Munin perch on his shoulders, and he says, I send Hugin and Munin, I send thought and memory out into the 9 worlds. Sometimes I am afraid that Hugin, thought, won't return. But even more afraid I am that memory will lose its way. Because thought without memory is just babbling words. Blah, 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 blah. Memory gives context and meaning to our thoughts. So thought and memory as soul parts of our own human complex it's essential to have a knowledge and good relationship, be able to call your thoughts back in. So for people with anxiety, one of the hardest things is that their thoughts suddenly pick something up and runs with it. And the ability to, through Wold-Willian way, through breathing with your will center, your heart center, and your spirit breath center aligned in your world tree, you can bring your thoughts, bring Hugin back in alignment. There's a beautiful Norwegian song, Hugin far så vida, thought flies so far. Sometimes it makes me think that it's a great mountain ahead, but when I get there, it's just a little hill. And Hugin far så vida, thought, spirit can fly so far. In the end verse, it says, when I pull my thoughts back in, I make myself glad with what I have. Because our happiness comes from the alignment of our hearts and our spirit and our thoughts and memories intact. So those are that's already quite a few words, isn't it? But there are more. Hugin, thought, and Hammer have a relationship. In some of the folk tales, you'll hear about somebody, when I was sitting on the side of the hill, I saw Gudrid coming for some coffee, so I ran up the hill to put the coffee on, and I waited and I waited and I waited, and she never came. So I came back down the hill and went into town and found Gudrid had died. And it was her Hug, or Hugin Hammer, that I saw. It was the apparition of her before she came, kind of thing that came to me. Sometimes when people brood and their thought becomes like poison, particularly in our Old Norse context, if you're longing for somebody and that is when you become elsk. Elsk is another type of a soul treatment that makes us change our course because somebody's thoughts are trained on us. And so it was very, very bad manners to pine over someone. And a lot of times those people who pined over some lost love or some unrequited love wound up to be musicians, and they played themselves into stupors every night. Or sometimes these were people who would do troll work on someone else. If I can't have you, no one will. And so they make the person of their target of their affection sick by too much brooding thought. That's how we feel, how our spirit is so strong within our complex of systems. So be careful. I'm reminded of a song that I learned as a child. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, ears, what you hear. Because the Father up above is looking down in love. And that was lovely. But I also realized that it is our care with where we put our thoughts, what we see, what we choose to look at, what we choose to hear, what we choose to expose ourselves to, that really does affect our ability to be in good relationship with our Hugin and our Munin. People ask if I like movies, and oftentimes I say nope, because I have to be really careful with that medium and how strongly it affects me, or I won't be able to shake it off for days, maybe weeks, depending on the intensity of it. And that has to do with all our different soul parts working in all these different ways. So there are soul parts then we see that have come from the gods themselves, soul parts that came from our ancestors, the trees, soul parts that came as a result of these other things, and soul parts that come from the Norns. We'll talk about the Norns here. Do I want to talk about the Norns right away? No, I think I will talk about soul parts that come from our ancestors, our human ancestry. We've got the fair soul that comes from our tree ancestors. And the parts that come from our human ancestors are Haminya, which means basically luck. It's sort of like luck. We are born with a certain amount of luck that is part of our soul parts that we can add to or take from as we make choices in the world. And maybe you've heard the phrase, oh, they're from a bad luck family, or nothing can touch them. That whole family has good luck all the time. This Haminya is something that is part of our ancestral soul parts. That we can pass down, that we can offer to others, that we can build up. And I think it's one of the reasons why Norse people really liked gambling. We have a long history of a love of games of chance and sporting with one another in chance ways that tests our strength of our luck. Even in the old poem here, it says the gods sat around before the Norns came on the face of the earth. They were sitting around playing with their luck and golden gaming pieces and that kind of thing. So Haminya is something that we can talk about in terms of healing, or this is where family curses would be lodged. This is where there's a lot of things that can play into the humming of each individual. Then there is a soul part called filja, and that means follower. And this is sort of like a spirit guide, or most often it is an ancestor. And a lot of times it comes in the shape of animal, or you might see this filja as a person. There's the filja of the family system could be something that is born on a family crest, for example, or like the filja of certain sports teams, like, for example, the gopher or the badger, are all parts of that sort of filja system. What is the token animal that follows our group, but also us individually? Those are really the main words that you're going to find when you talk about soul parts in Norse tradition. Ånden, åd, hammer, fera, hugg, mun, hamminja, and filja. So that's kind of the map. There are more parts, actually, that are part of our soul complexes, but I think I'm out of room, so I'm just going to leave it here. And then I'm going to talk about the healing pieces in the next session.